So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and you're very welcome to Dublin Castle for the launch of the report of the Citizens' Assembly on Drugs Use. My name is Cathal O'Regan, I'm the Secretary to the Citizens' Assembly, and I'm joined on stage this afternoon by Minister Hildegard Naughton, who's the Minister with responsibility for the National Drug Strategy, and also by the Chairman of the Citizens' Assembly, Paul Reid. And so, what we'll be doing over the next 20 minutes is having speeches from both the Chairman and the Minister, followed by a short presentation by myself, and then we'll get into a session for the last 35-40 minutes, which is an opportunity for people in the audience here this afternoon to share their comments and their initial responses to the document which has just been published. So, before we get underway though, we're going to show a short video which will give you a sense of the Citizens' Assembly, what it was like, who was involved in it, the type of comments and statements that were being made. So it's a short compilation video that we're going to play for the next 5 minutes, and then we'll get into the speeches from the Chair and the Minister. So thank you very much.
It is a great privilege to join you all here today in this Citizens' Assembly process and what's going to be, I believe, a momentous discussion. But you are the only people who will make the decisions in this room, on this Assembly.
We would encourage everyone to be bold in their questioning and recommendations as we go through the process.
But what I would like to see is something active and dynamic grow, because you can bang about the criminal law book forever and ever and ever, and it doesn't stop murder, it doesn't stop any of the other of these horrible crimes. So criminalising and making it a criminal justice issue solely is not what it's going to work.
People like ourselves working in this sector want to help people out of this. People who are in addiction want to get out of addiction. They do not want, this is not a lifelong dream to be in addiction. They want to be out of it.
So the question I suppose we have is, when people reach out for help, why are we putting hurdles in the way?
I think early intervention and clear pathways into recovery has to take place.
And I visited Coolmine this morning, the ladies, and again, emotional, it actually works. And it doesn't need to be reinvented.
So my point really is, once you have a good, solid, robust structure, integrated, good partner in the community like Coolmine, ourselves in the HSC advocating for more, you can get results.
Not everybody can go through the health-led approach, which is wonderful, but there needs to be something when that doesn't work.
And the sooner we get stuck into accommodating and minding young people, and the better in terms of prevention.
How do we support young people from an early age? How do we improve our education system and their experience of the education system?
But at what point do we see them as victims? Because a 30 and 40 and 15-year-old, how do we see them as a criminal? They have been failed by successive government policies, they've been failed by statutory agencies, they've been failed by education systems, housing policy, social welfare policy.
The consequence of all this is that punishing these children on the assumption that they have a free rein to act pro-socially or anti-socially is unfair. Punishing them is also ineffective.
I have 2 teenagers, and you have changed my thought process completely about drugs and about the future of this country. You know, trauma is the root of addiction, and this has to be recognised and the stigma removed.
We need to harness this recovery capital at a systemic level. We need our key partners across housing, health, education, employment, social services and justice. Where we live, where we play and where we work will determine our health. When we have health in all policy, health improvements are clear.
What we need are treatments that recognise a biopsychosocial model. We need treatments that can overlap that. But more important than that, it has to be rooted in compassion and empathy. It's not conveyor belt approach.
I don't believe that 9 individuals for 26 counties is enough. It's not enough. It's not adequate. Can we please take our heads out of the sand for once and for all?
If someone was, say, being referred to the service and the person is based in Galway, and I'm having somebody who's in possession in Donegal, which is a 4-hour trip, how do I refer them on?
And I think there's moments like this when we get to talk about it, especially in the traveller community, and bring awareness around about it. Everything helps.
what do people tell us? They tell us they want to live. They tell us they want to realise their full potential. They tell us they want to have a stake in society. They tell us they want to be involved.
So there's kind of pockets of really good things happening all around the place. But there's some momentum now by the existence of the Assembly to say, let's get clear on this and have one clear strategy that everyone is rowing in behind.
If you do good things for other people, your own self-esteem improves. They benefit. And if you think about that as a community entity, across services, across interventions in families, across people who are struggling because they don't have a sense of belonging, it is really powerful.
When they're not looked at as just a number and a statistic, you see them as people. They're literally like somebody sitting in the bus next to you. Could be exactly like them in Cool Minds, and you wouldn't know it. They're not criminals. They shouldn't be treated like criminals. They're not serial killers or terrorists. They're suffering an addiction, and it should be helped.
In my view, this is a very momentous weekend. I guess the challenge for us is to decide on what end of the spectrum we recommend forward to government, and that's entirely in your hands. And you've embraced that opportunity, and that's what you've come forward and done, represented the Irish population. We've set out we want the most senior accountability level, a dedicated cabinet committee. We don't want this hanging on a shelf. We want it going to the Oireachtas. We want it going to government straight away. This is not just about a policy. This is about saving people's lives, about saving families, saving communities, destigmatising people who have been marginalised through many of the harms caused by drugs. So what really will make a difference for us is you embrace this report and implement it. So, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. You all look smashing from up here anyway. So Minister, members of the Oireachtas, members of the Judiciary, particular welcome to members of the Citizens' Assembly, my good colleagues and friends who've worked hard over the last 7 months or so. And invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, you're all very welcome, and it's my privilege and pleasure to be here today with you all, I guess, to launch and introduce the report which sets out our deliberations, our engagements, our discussions during the Assembly process, and ultimately the 36 recommendations that's in the report and set out. We were given quite an important task and challenge by the Oireachtas, set out the objectives for us to come back by the end of 2023, by the end of December, and come back with a report that sets out some key recommendations in terms of legislation, policy and operational issues, services. I'm very pleased to say that we have completed our work and we have completed on time. The report has been formally published on the Oireachtas site just today, earlier today, and I'm also pleased to say that earlier this morning I had a formal meeting in handing over the report to the Taoiseach and indeed to Minister Naughton. In case I forget to say later on, I was very reassured and very encouraged that meeting, because I knew I was representing the 99 Assembly members who were working with me on the commitment they put into that, but the response from the Taoiseach and the Minister, and the Minister will talk shortly, was very encouraging for me to see that there's a strong recognition something needs to change. We can't keep doing things the way we are, and we do need to make a shift in our policy and our strategy and services. So it was very encouraging just to say that. The report, as you'll note, is published in 2 volumes. Volume 1 sets out the key recommendations. The reason for Volume 2 is we were very anxious to ensure that we represented the amazing stakeholders, individuals, communities, families who came in and spoke to us. So Volume 2 represents great depth in all of the people who presented to the Assembly and their experiences and their views and their lived experiences and stories. It's very encouraged throughout the process at all times the members of the Citizens' Assembly really embraced the whole issue of deliberative democracy. We came to consensus on some issues, we disagreed on some issues, but at all times people carried out the debate with a really strong level of respect and dignity for each other's views, and that was strongly encouraged. So you'll see from the report, we didn't always have a full consensus. We voted on some issues, and one issue in particular was quite a tight difference of 1 vote, which is the issue around cannabis. But ultimately, can I just say, the Assembly members, the output is a response, an outcome from 7 months of work from the Assembly members, 6 full Assembly meetings over the period of that, over weekends. 130 presenters came in and gave us various different levels of expertise from their points of view. We had 250 hours of deliberations at the tables for the Assembly members themselves to have a dialogue on what they heard presented. And indeed, we had 800 submissions from the public submitted to us. I'm very pleased to say they will be published online today as well. At the conclusion of the process, ultimately, we have, as I've just said, 36 recommendations, and they do strand across the three areas: legislation, policy, and services. And I know a lot of discussion, and even at the start of this debate and during this debate and now at the end of our debate on it, a lot of discussion tends to focus in on the one issue around decriminalisation, legalisation. It's really important for us as the Assembly members in presenting this report that we look at the report in its entirety. That is one really important recommendation. There are 35 other really important recommendations that need to do justice to people in the services, people providing services, that we need to do justice to as well. But at a very high level, we do believe what I've said. We looked at all other countries. Many people talk about the Portuguese model or the Canadian model or the US model. We believe what we have come and recommended is an Irish model set in an Irish context. And that's the way I would like us to have that further discussion in relation to the report. Some summary recommendations from the report, just to touch on them very briefly. Obviously, we've recommended a decriminalised model put in place to pivot and shift away from the current model of the first point of entry for somebody caught in possession for personal use, potentially being through the criminal justice system. There has to be a very fundamental shift in terms of how we approach that. Secondly, we are advocating and calling for stronger political priority to put into oversight of this issue. Yes, the departments, yes, agencies all have a key role, but we really want to see the political oversight of this being very strong, and we are calling for a dedicated Cabinet Committee chaired by an Taoiseach. And we did have a concern, the Assembly members expressed frustration in the past that there was legislation, there has been legislation on the shelf which hasn't been enacted, which could have moved us in a health-led approach. So we want to see this now really taken with urgency. Prioritisation of the supports, particularly for marginalised and stigmatised communities. We heard very strong lived experiences of people and communities and families who suffer awful stigma, awful marginalisation. So we do want to see those communities prioritised. Enhanced funding, it calls for some of the services. One of the issues we experienced was the challenges and dilemmas for the voluntary community organisations, Section 39 organisations, not being clear on the multi-annual funding process, not being clear what might come next year. So we're looking for greater clarity on the funding and multi-annual funding process. But ultimately strengthening services, particularly around harm reduction and recovery. Johanna Ivers, who is here today, talks very eloquently about recovery capital. I might have a better chance of coming out of recovery than somebody else does. They may not have a home, they may not have a family, they may not have many of the supports which I might have. And I think that's something we want to put supports behind. And also we want to see continued, in case it's not said very strongly, the very challenging job that An Garda Síochána, who are here today, put themselves and their lives at risk in trying to address the whole issue of supply and criminal and organised gangs. We want to see that further support as well. But the stark reality for drug use in Ireland and all of our deliberations and all of our experiences, we've heard from over those 7 months, many strong stories of people being groomed into criminal acts and organised crime at a very young age. Several thousand people in the Irish population, 70% of the Irish prison population, 70% in addiction. That's a really stark figure. I spent 2 separate days in Mountjoy Prison talking with the teams and the staff in there, and they don't have the supports. They don't have some of the supports that are available in the community, and that's a real call to action in there. But we heard repeated stories. If there's one word or theme for me, and I think for many of the Assembly members that came through the process, was the whole issue of trauma. Many reasons why people use drugs is they have suffered early life trauma, whether it's some form of abuse, medical abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, and then they get to use drugs to try and numb the pain, numb the effect. And then they get into a dependency, and then they get into addiction, and then they get into a criminal system. It's an awful, vicious cycle, and we believe this is an opportunity to aim to break that vicious cycle. We heard many stories from women and children, members of the travelling community as well, issues around dual diagnosis. You know, this is not a simple issue. It's not a whole issue around drugs. There's many other factors, particularly for areas of high social deprivation. And poverty. People who suffer poverty are more likely going to suffer from the impacts of drugs. We heard compelling evidence from experts all across the field and the services, and indeed internationally. But I do want in particular to call out to people who have come in and spoken to us about their lived experiences. Individuals, families, communities came in and shared their experiences. It was probably the most impactful process throughout the whole Assembly. I know the Assembly members, we found it really grounded us. We got a sense of urgency and the challenge and responsibility that we had as members of the Assembly to address it. So I really want to take particular thanks to many of those individuals that were here today for really sharing it. We really, and I really want to recognise it here today. We appreciate what you've done for us. To conclude, I will just say, if anyone who has takes the time to read this report, I think it is and it will reflect the most deliberative, informed, engaged discussion that's ever happened on drugs in the history of the state, and the report on the depth, I think, reflects that. I guess the submissions I mentioned earlier will be published later on today. Just final message from myself. We do believe that the report and the recommendations presents a once-in-a-generational opportunity to make a very real difference for the future, for some of the impacts and some of the harm that many communities and individuals and families suffer related to drugs. We believe our recommendations land in the right place to make that difference. We owe it to all of those people who are suffering in society in general to embrace it. So my final call today, and again I was reassured significantly at the meeting with the Minister earlier today, but my final call is today, we've done our work. This is over to the political system now. They need to take ownership of it, they need to embrace it. We need to have a sense of conviction, a sense of urgency to act on these recommendations now. People's lives are at stake. In the 7 months we met, probably close to 800 people have died through the impacts of drugs. So let's ground in that reality. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm now going to call on Minister Naughton to present a few words as well. Thank you. Thank you, Minister.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honoured to be here today, and I'd like to first of all acknowledge Mr. Paul Reid, members of the Citizens Assembly who are here today, our Oireachtas members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. As Minister with responsibility for the National Drugs Strategy, I am very pleased and honoured to be here today in Dublin Castle to speak at the launch of the report of the Citizens Assembly on drug use. As we're all aware, the misuse of illicit drugs affects every part of Irish society, whether urban or rural, affluent or disadvantaged. The misuse of drugs has devastating consequences, not only for the individuals grappling with addiction, but also for their families and the communities where they live. And we are all aware of the consequences: poor health and mental health outcomes for people in addiction, families torn apart, profiteering by unscrupulous gangs from the misery of others, drug-related intimidation of communities, just to name a few. Government is committed to taking a health-led approach to the issue of illicit drugs, a position which is endorsed by this report. And I appreciate that there are many challenges, but as Minister with responsibility for this area, I'm committed to building on the progress already made. I have long held the view that we as a society need to have an open and honest conversation about drug use in this country. Ensuring that the voices of those with lived experiences and the voice of young people are heard, I think, is key in putting in place the appropriate responses. Government's decision to establish a Citizens' Assembly on drug use has started this conversation, has started this process. And as we can see from this report, drug misuse is a complex issue and there are no easy solutions. People grappling with addiction face different challenges. Some may have the support of family, others may not. Some may be in employment, while others struggle to secure a job because of the nature of their illness. Access to education can also be an issue. And the nature of addiction is very different for each affected person. For example, there are people who not only have an addiction to drugs, but also struggle with their mental health. And I've secured funding this year to help these people with a dual diagnosis, with a particular focus on younger people. Last year, we saw the devastating effects of the synthetic opioid nitocene, which caused overdoses to drug users in Dublin and Cork. And the emergency response and investment in the naloxone programme undoubtedly helped save lives. I want to expand the use of naloxone, making it more accessible to support workers, peers and family members. And I'm also fully supportive of the ongoing work with An Garda Síochána towards a pilot training frontline Gardaí to carry and administer this life-saving medicine. And while I have secured additional funding to provide more treatment episodes for those in need, we know there are gaps in service provision. And that's why I have asked for an audit of the services to be completed so that we can ensure that services are available where they're most needed. And just because somebody has received treatment, it doesn't mean that they're in a position to always go on to lead a happy and positive and productive life. And that's why we're investing for the first time in recovery. We're making good progress all the time, and we're implementing the National Drug Strategy, but it needs to be reviewed and the new strategy put in place. So this will happen this year. We cannot be complacent. New drugs such as nitocene come onto the market all the time, and that is why we're investing in the early warning system to help prevent needless deaths. But we must also be realistic in how to respond to this problem to secure the best outcomes for those who need it. To be clear, anyone involved in drug dealing, whether importing drugs or selling them, should face the full rigours of the law. But nothing is served by jailing a person in addiction caught for drugs for their personal use. And that is why I'm committed to introducing a health diversion programme, which will connect people suffering from problematic drug use with our health services and the health services that they need, and provide a pathway to treatment and recovery. Harm reduction is key. That's why people can deposit drugs at festivals for testing under the Safer Nighttime programme to ensure that people aren't putting themselves at risk by taking bad batches of drugs. That's why a medically supervised injecting facility will open this year to provide a safe space for people to inject drugs. It's why the new residential medical facility by the Dublin Simon community has been funded by government. In line with the Citizens' Assembly's recommendations to prioritise the needs of marginalised groups and disadvantaged communities, I'm also supporting a number of initiatives for people who are homeless. This includes providing health supports to help sustain tenancies under the Housing First programme. This is a landmark report for the further development of policy on drug use. Choosing to have a Citizens' Assembly on drug use demonstrates the seriousness and the gravity that government gives to this issue and its awareness of the impact of drugs on all corners and sections of our society. And I would like to sincerely extend my sincere thanks to the 99 members of the Citizens' Assembly, your chairperson, Paul Reid, the government departments and agencies, the Secretariat, civil society, the national and international experts who gave up so much of your time to come and work on this really important piece of work. A huge amount of work has been completed in just a few short months, and I look forward to engaging with colleagues over the coming months ahead and keeping the momentum going to value the work that you have done. I know this important work is it's absolutely critical for the country, and I want to honour the work that you've done by reflecting on these recommendations, as will the Oireachtas. Gura míle maith. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. So we now have a very quick presentation. I'm going to keep it brief because we want to open the floor to some comments and questions shortly. So we're due to wrap up here by 2 p.m. I'm going to very quickly bring you through a a sense of the recommendations without going into any great detail. First of all, the recommendations were the culmination, as the Chair has said, of a long 7 months of hard work by the members of the Citizens' Assembly, and I want to pay tribute to the members of the Citizens' Assembly for their commitment and dedication. The recommendations have stemmed from the work that went on during those 7 months, what we call the deliberative process, the roundtable discussions. 250 hours worth of roundtable discussions are the place where these recommendations generated or originated. They then went into voting on the final meeting, and that was all overseen by members of the Assembly themselves, who were appointed as scrutineers, and we had an independent returning officer as well. So everything was professionally conducted and transparently reported, and you'll see that in the report. Volume 2 sets out the exact voting results of each and every vote that was taken. And what I would like to draw your attention to is the fact that the report comes in 2 volumes. Volume 1 is the lighter and more easily readable volume. Volume 2 contains a lot more of the nitty-gritty detail. The reason we went to the bother, I suppose, of including so much detail in the document is because the details do matter in situations like this, where there are contested interpretations of what the Citizens' Assembly meant when it spoke about prevention, or when it made a recommendation around a comprehensive health-led approach, including decriminalisation. We spent a lot of time debating and discussing with legal experts, criminologists, policy specialists around what, for example, the word decriminalisation means. There is, I think, in this report you'll find greater clarity and insightfulness about different types of decriminalisation, and if there's any doubt in the future as the Oireachtas comes to examining these questions, the detail in the Citizens' Assembly report spells this out in black and white. So let there be less confusion, hopefully, in the future around what the Citizens' Assembly has made, because the details are written there in black and white. Each recommendation has 2 parts to it. The first part is the headline. That's already been published the day after the voting took place. We published these headlines of the recommendations. But what you'll find now in the report is equally important, is the accompanying explanatory narrative. This is just an example of the explanatory narrative for recommendation number 1. And so we'd encourage everybody who's interested in interpreting what the Citizens' Assembly meant, not just to read the headlines, but delve into the detail here, because it does flesh it out for each and every one of the 36 recommendations. And that's important, I think, to the members of the Citizens' Assembly, because they spend so much time clarifying every single point and dotting their I's and crossing their T's as part of the preparation for the balloting. So the information, if there's any doubt or confusion, lies within the report, and we'd encourage you to refer to that for each of the recommendations. We also have published, as I said, the detailed accounts of the results, so it's not just a yes or no. You can see how many people voted, what were the number of spoiled votes, and the numbers of yeas and nays for each and every single one of the recommendations. That's published in Volume 2. 36 recommendations, and I think what you'll see is that they're very comprehensive, very wide-ranging, and very deep. They span the totality of policy problems and challenges around the terms of reference. So it includes a focus on strategy and information, I think, that will inform, hopefully, the next iteration of the National Drug Strategy. It also includes a lot of information for policy development, information on, and recommendations, indeed, on changes to legislation, as well as operational opportunities to improve and expand and enhance operations and service delivery. There's a wide range of topics dealt with: governance and accountability, implementation, funding and resources, prevention, harm reduction, treatment, recovery and supply reduction are just some of the topics dealt with within those 36 recommendations. Different types of harms are focused on: the direct harms that are caused to individuals, families, communities and wider society, but also the indirect harms, which are sometimes hidden harms, less difficult or less easy to identify and understand and recognise. But we heard so much during the course of the Assembly from family members speaking about the impact on the wider family system when somebody has problematic drug use. And we also heard about the harms caused by criminalising people who have problematic drug use, or the shame and stigma that goes with it, and some of the punishment, I suppose, that comes with the penalties. So there's a lot of different indirect and hidden harms as well, and I think it's important to delve into the detail of the report to understand why there are 36 recommendations. So moving quickly on before the chairperson calls time. So there are generalised recommendations that apply to the entire population, but then there are very specific targeted subgroups, as the Chair mentioned, disadvantaged communities, marginalised and vulnerable individuals, and communities like members of the travelling community. We heard a lot about the challenges facing women and mothers in particular, people experiencing homelessness, and as the Minister said, people with mental health difficulties, suffering with dual diagnosis, and young people as well, and the challenges facing young people as they're, particularly young people in disadvantaged communities that are vulnerable to the coercion and the grooming, if you like, into low-level criminality, and challenges as well for the prison population. We heard an awful lot about that, and there are recommendations within the Citizens Assembly report about how we can deal better with people who find themselves convicted and sent to prison. So actors, a wide range of people here in the room today, from government, the Oireachtas to judiciary, right across the sectors, health, justice, education, so on. It's important to recognise that these recommendations in their totality require a whole of government and whole of society response. Statutory, community and voluntary sectors delighted to see so many representatives of those groups here today, and stakeholders including drug and alcohol task forces, service providers, but also service users and people who use drugs, who made a valuable and indeed essential contribution to the discussions during the Citizens' Assembly. So there are recommendations in our 36 that relate to that as well, and families and communities, of course. So some details not fully determined in relation to recommendation 17 about a comprehensive health approach. We have recommended that the Oireachtas and the government go into more detailed scrutiny around what exactly is meant by this and how it can be accomplished within the Irish legal framework. It's not just decriminalisation, it's also diversion and dissuasion. Essentially, an Irish version of what goes on in Portugal, but it's a 3D model. It's not a one-dimensional linear model. It's three objectives that need to be attained in conjunction with each other: diversion, dissuasion, and decriminalisation. We need an Irish solution, as the Chair said, and that requires further legal scrutiny to determine how it can be done in an Irish legal context. Maintaining perspective, this is my final point. Do bear in mind there are 36 recommendations, and I would say to the members of the Oireachtas and to the media that are here present today, there is a huge interest and a focus on one recommendation out of the 36, which relates to what is done for simple possession offences in the future. That is only one issue that is important, but equally important are all of the other 35 recommendations. And the Citizens' Assembly, if it did anything, was it explored the topics of drugs use in such great detail and depth that is just one recommendation, and it would be a shame if the public discourse and debate now reverted back to focusing on one single issue to the exclusion of all the other important issues that are there in black and white in the report of the Assembly. I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much, and thank you once again, especially to the members of the Assembly.
Thanks, Cathal, and thanks, Minister. Just before I open it out for Q&A, I just want to recognise one more time, I know the Minister's done it, but we've about 35 of the 99 Assembly members here, and all of the many of the advisory steering group who helped me throughout the process, and they gave a lot of time and commitment of their own time over a 7-month period, so I would really like to show our appreciation for those members in particular. Okay, going to open we have a roving mic. Just to clarify, this is not a press conference, so I know there are many members of the media and press here and journalists. We're quite happy to have a discussion separately outside. We have a room, we have availability, so we'll do it with media press later. So I'm going to ask for people. So Aidan Reardon from the Oireachtas.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. And just first of all to say this feels like a very historic day. So, hopefully we can look back in years to come and say this was the moment that things began to change. And with that, just want to congratulate you, Paul, Cathal, and especially the Minister, who I think has been great in championing this. I just want to know what happens next as a member of the Oireachtas. You mentioned the Cabinet Committee chaired by the Taoiseach. Other citizens' assemblies have gone to a joint Oireachtas committee specially established. So I just want to get a bit of clarity as to what happens next from the Oireachtas point of view. Is it a Cabinet Committee chaired by the Taoiseach, or is it the more conventional way, which has been a cross-party joint Oireachtas committee? Thanks.
I'm going to take two questions at a time just to get a few people in. So Senator Ruan, I know you want to come in as well. We'll ask the Minister then. Just here at the top, sorry, You can give me an indication if you want to, and I'll keep an eye out, please.
So that was one of my questions as well, so just to kind of to loop back on that. But the other one I have is in relation to recommendation 17. Like you said, that there's many still unanswered questions for the Oireachtas on. And first I want to acknowledge the fact that the Citizens' Assembly didn't separate out what drugs should be decriminalised, and I think that that's extremely important for the Oireachtas to keep in mind as it moves forward, because we can't, I suppose, talk about trauma and poverty and all of those issues if we don't recognise that certain types of drugs have a certain concentration in certain communities that have a high level of a certain type of drug use. So that principle should stay true as we go through to, I suppose, the Oireachtas and the work that we carry out there, so that there doesn't end up being a class distinction, I suppose, in terms of what types of drugs are being discussed in terms of decriminalisation. But the question I have is, maybe Paul, from your understanding of the room on the day, and I think the volume 2 is really important, I think, for capturing the understanding of the room, in the, I suppose, objectives that have to be looked at in that 3D, the court system and justice is mentioned a lot, and I suppose it would be my understanding from watching the Citizens' Assembly that there is no health-led approach with a justice system. Even merely getting stopped on the street impacts. It is stigmatisation. So you don't have to end up with an actual charge and go to prison for your health to be impacted at various different stages along the way by the justice system, or even to stand in front of a judge who then says, well, the diversion is that you now go into, a local service. So that the health-led piece is not only in relation to being left with a conviction, it's in relation to having to engage with the justice system in any shape or form in relation to personal possession for drug use. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on what the general feel was in the room for that, because mine would be that a health-led approach is not justice-led. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to ask the Minister first the questions and comments, please, Minister.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Deputy O'Riordan and Senator Ruan, for your questions. So next steps, and number one, I want to keep the momentum going here and not delay. So it's my intention to bring a memo to Cabinet in relation to the establishment of a special committee to consider the recommendations, all the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly report, and I want that to happen without delay, so as quickly as possible, and they will be given time to reflect, and then obviously at the same time I'll be continuing the work that I do. I'm not going to be waiting for the Oireachtas committee to report. I'll continue in relation to what I've just spoken about there around dual diagnosis, carrying out that mapping, auditing exercise across the country to find out where the gaps in provision are, increasing funding, which I have in the last budget, and all of the other areas I've mentioned. So it's really important that while the government is responding, the Special Oireachtas Committee will be as well engaging and maybe bringing in some of the speakers, but maybe looking at other speakers that you want to bring on board in relation to looking at these individual recommendations. In relation to the different types of drugs, Lynn, again, I think this is where I'm open, right, in relation to what happens here, and that's where I think the work of the Oireachtas Committee will be really important. Again, I'm working on a health diversion programme, working with the Department of Justice around that. There are legal complexities around it, but everything can be resolved, but it's about making sure that we move through that. So again, it will go back to the Oireachtas Committee, but I will be progressing with the health diversion programme for people in possession of drugs and I suppose teasing out the issues there.
Thanks, Minister, and I'll too try to be brief. Just to Senator Ruan, first of all, again, from the Assembly members, we were very clear. We did not distinguish between different types of drugs. Obviously, it's over to you, the political system, quite rightly, and you can have that further debate, but we did not make any distinction. Secondly, just again briefly on the health-led approach, I don't want to leave this maybe a bit ambiguous. I want to be very clear. We went for a model that is health-led, not a model that goes criminal justice-led and then health-led. A model that's a direct route into a health-led system. That's our view, and it was a very clear view from the Assembly members. got to keep an eye out. Sorry, one of my Assembly colleagues is there.
Good afternoon, just a request, really, just to ask all stakeholders involved in this process going forward that they support the Minister in her efforts to get this across the line, and that we get an annual review update of where we're at. We don't want this to sit on the shelves for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Andy, at the back middle, please. Andy O'Hara from Ishka.
How are we doing? Thanks, Paul. I think Aileen said it there. I think today could be a seminal moment, and I think we have to make it a seminal moment. I think it's worth reflecting on probably all the people who haven't made it this far, or all the harm that's been caused, but also credit and recognition to the people who got us to the point where we've had a citizen assembly and that we carried it out. And I think we have to have the highest of standards. We have to say we're going to reduce drug deaths, we're going to improve outcomes, and we're going to make stronger communities. And to do that, we have to really put value in the people who are the most marginalised or the most impacted. And I would say this, I'd say in 5, 10 or 15 years, we need to look back and see how strong were we on implementation. Because there is a lot of good stuff in this report, but some of it has probably been said over the years and has been in other reports. So get really strong on implementation and get really good at measuring it. And central to that process of implementation and measuring it should be centred around the collaborative piece between people who use drugs, their families, communities, and the services and the sector, because we all want the same things. And I think one of the things I would just finish on is there's a lot of stuff in this report that probably 20 or 30 years ago would have just been a non-runner because it just would have been seen as too radical. A lot of the times the stuff that we probably perceive as radical is practical. So let's be quick, let's be practical, and let's implement stuff as quickly as possible and make sure that the voices of people who use drugs, their families and our communities are equal in sharing the power. Because that's another thing. I think sometimes we're good at making the reports, talking about how we're going to implement it. But as we go through that process, we have to look at what's the framework and what's the process by which we share power. Because if we do that, we will achieve the best outcomes for people who use drugs, our families and our communities.
Okay, Andy, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more comment, Minister, and then we might take those two questions.
Thank you very much. Again, to emphasise what all the other speakers have said and what we've heard. Over the course of the last this isn't a political, this shouldn't be a political issue. Shouldn't be a political issue. So even coming up on the radio today with some of the commentators, when you hear different political parties from different persuasions going on and the attack and all the rest like that, this isn't political. This is people's lives. And the other thing is the government of the day now. You have wonderful organisations in front of me, Kilmine, for an example, and Justice Anne Ryan's courts thing that was implemented, 20 odd years ago and hasn't on a trial and still hasn't been sorted. It's time to wake up, get the job done, realise we have that issue, and now to get going. Because people's lives, it's people that are dying every day of the week. And we need to get it sorted.
Thank you. Thank you. Minister? Minister, do you want to make any comments? Or I know they're just general comments, but
just, I suppose I get the urgency here, absolutely, and I agree with everything that has been said. It's important we get this right as well. This is our moment. This is a pivotal moment for us. You've done a huge amount of work, and that's why I think the work of the Oireachtas committee will be really important, just to tease out, because this conversation needs to continue. It's not just over after your report here. We need to start really having that honest conversation about what is actually happening. It's not just those in drug addiction, but it's the recreational use. It's all of those issues that people really don't like to talk about. We need to start really assessing how we deal with it all. So look, you have my commitment, and I welcome your support and the support of the Oireachtas members. We need to get this right. And if people want to make political games out of it, that's fine, that's politics. But keep our eye on the ball here in relation to people's lives and supporting them. That's where I'm coming from here. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I can, two really quick comments just on Andy's point around the strategy. There is there's a specific action or recommendation in the report that says develop a new strategy based on what we believe are many of the findings in the report, develop it by June of 2024, but particularly specifically to put in there some key measures of outcomes, and to put in there some clear roles and responsibilities to see the actions through. So it is a dedicated recommendation again for consideration. And finally, just on the political response, I have been encouraged over the past few weeks and since our work concluded at the end of November, at the end of October, by certainly the initial cross-party response that we've got and cross-party statements that emerged. It gives me great hope and encouragement that this is good cross-party support, but again, that's up to the political system. Sorry, just, okay, the Crown guys are trying to get in, I know. We wouldn't let you go without getting in, I promise you.
Can you hear me, yeah?
Yeah, I hear you.
All right, good job, Paul. You were very strong earlier today, I have to say, on saying that this needs to be taken seriously by the Oireachtas. And I just want to give credit to some of the Oireachtas members who are here today who have been taking this seriously for many, many years. So my question is kind of for the Minister. There's an Oireachtas member here, Deputy Jean O'Kenny, has a bill next week. So he's been taking this seriously for many years. This legislation has been on the table for 2 years. If we're serious about being quick, like Paul has been saying, we need to get the political system taking this seriously. Will you be supporting that? And am I correct in assuming that you will take this seriously and support that very simple, modest, humane measure in line with these recommendations? That's my question, Minister. Thanks.
Okay, and we will, Minister, come to you now. Just one more, just back there, please.
Thank you, Minister Naughton. First of all, I'd like to thank you because as clinical lead for dual diagnosis, we're delighted that you were able to get us funding for the adolescent team in Tala. So, and thank you yourself and Minister Butler, who also supported the dual diagnosis services. And to Paul Reid for recommending that we need increased resources, because I think that's very important, that resources needs to follow recommendations. And also, because we need it. Unless we have enough resources, we can't support people. At the same time, we also need to make sure that existing resources are not taken away because of the current recruitment freeze, because that's another major issue for us, because we couldn't recruit people and there are worries that those fundings might be withdrawn from the previous years, because these are clinical programs which are very vital to the country, very vital to our people, and hopefully we will have continued support from yourself and your colleagues, Minister Butler and Taoiseach. Thank you very much.
And I think, just a brief comment, the Minister, I want to say we got a greater understanding at the Assembly of the issue of dual diagnosis, and you can't just route a person down one route and ignore, the other challenging issues. So, and the Minister's made some comments, but you might want to make some more.
Thank you. First of all, in relation to, I suppose, private members' business, it goes to Cabinet every week. We make decisions at a Cabinet level. But what I can say and reiterate, I take this issue very seriously. That's why we set up the Citizens' Assembly. If it was easy, I think we would be able to legislate ourselves as an Oireachtas, but it is such a complex area, and we need to look at all consequences, unintended and intended, in relation to this. This is our chance to get it right, and I will welcome, as Oireachtas members have done, met with me, had meetings with me. I've engaged with drug and alcohol task forces right across the country, NGOs, experts here in the room, from the HSE, from academia, people who know on the front line, and as Andy said, people who are in addiction, the lived experience. That's who I'm listening to. So my door is open, my viewpoint is open in relation to this, and I think if you think you know it all, you don't. You're on a spiral downwards, and that's the position I'm coming from. What I want to do and what I have been doing is funding dual diagnosis, making sure that I'm listening to the best evidence. This all has to be evidence-based. And what might seem like a really good idea, when I get the information that it might have particular unintended consequences, whatever that are, that needs to be aired through this Oireachtas committee. And that's why the Citizens' Assembly work is really good. The conversation has started, but it is not over. We still have to start peeling back what's happening here in this country in relation to drug use, the good, bad and the ugly, and we need to be able to respond to it. So you have my commitment around resources, staffing, all of that, recruitment embargoes. This is where we need to get real, and I need to make sure that the funding is there. I have in the last budget, I've increased the drugs funding by 6 million, despite the issues within the health budget this year, because this is where we need to go. So it's a really good starting point, and I want it to continue and to build on the progress that has already been made. Thanks.
Okay, just down the back. Yeah, we have.
Thank you. Professor Catherine Comiskey, Trinity College, Dublin. I'm chair of the European Scientific Committee for Drugs. I'm delighted to see the Citizens' Assembly, particularly thank the citizens. I'm delighted that you highlighted many recommendations. I would like to ask about the drug safe injecting facilities. I mean, we've had a terrible delay on that. The evidence across the world shows that these facilities, safe injecting and drug consumption rooms, work. They save lives, they prevent overdose. Given that we're facing potential overdoses with these new drugs, are there any plans to increase or to expand the plans for safe injecting and drug consumption rooms? And this also links to the closure of laneways. Trinity has other buildings, and my own laneway that I have my office on was closed a few years ago. There's women in there with buggies, there's parents, and to see people having to inject or to use substances in, urine streets, it's just horrendous. And this is somebody's daughter, somebody's granddaughter. Literally, my office was beside one of the lanes, Leinster Lane, beautiful lane that has been closed for a number of years. So I'd love to see that being taken up and expanded across the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clear. I'm actually going to go straight to the Minister on that one, and then I'm going to actually call in Professor Eamon Keenan, who's in the audience, who has led the chant, and indeed Aidan O'Riordan, Deputy Aidan O'Riordan, who was, as a former Minister, led the proposal on the self-injection facility, but Eamon will give us an update where that's at. But Minister.
Thank you. Just on the supervised injecting facility, Merchants Quay, that will be open in September of this year. The delays were due to planning. There's a huge amount of work happening behind the scenes, can I tell you, in relation to that? And you raise a really valid issue there around, I'm open to the rollout of those facilities. This is a pilot, and again, my door is open in relation to this. Let's get this right. But this is not just about the Department of Health or the Gardaí. This is about Dublin City Council, no matter where you are around the country. It's local authorities, it's housing. It comes back to this. It's not just that one recommendation of this report. It's about Department of Education, housing, local government, obviously justice, health, everyone. This has to be a whole of government approach in relation to our streetscapes, in relation to supporting people. Once you get off, and Johanna will be very familiar with this, it's not just about, recovery means how do you get back into a job? How do you get a house? How do we support people get back into society? This is an all of government approach. So I hear and I understand your question, and just to know that we have the supervising injecting facility coming on stream in September.
Now, Eamon, no pressure. Eamon Keenan from the HSE, who's been very supportive throughout the process as well.
Thanks, Paul. So in relation to the supervised injecting facility, as the Minister says, it will be open in Q3 of this year. We've been through a very protracted process in relation to negotiations, planning commissions and board planola, judicial reviews, which has we've persevered through it. Both the HSE and Merchants Quay and the Department have persevered through that process to ensure that we do have the supervised injecting facility open this year. Just to say, it's not a magic bullet. Okay, it is one element of a harm reduction response in relation to drug use. And I think we saw just before Christmas, and even since the Citizens' Assembly has ended, we saw the introduction of synthetic opioids. We saw 57 overdoses in Dublin, we had 20 overdoses in Cork. And what was really gratifying was the stakeholder response, the communication between the HSE and Garda Síochána, the ambulance service, communications and the NGO sector all responded together to address those issues. Those issues are going to be with us now. So the supervised injecting facility, while it's got the headlines and it seems to be a wonderful initiative, it is only one element of a harm reduction response, which includes getting people into treatment and the provision of naloxone. So I really welcome the recommendations. I point out that the fact that it's health-led, it's not health only. It's right across society, and that's why I think having the Cabinet Committee chaired by the Taoiseach, having all departments and all levels of society involved in the response to drug use is really important. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay. Probably time for one or two more comments or questions, but yeah.
Hello, thank you. Welcome the report from the Citizens' Assembly. Mick Devine is my name. I'm with a voluntary treatment agency, Table Group in Cork. And I just want to take the opportunity, adding device in, to underline the importance of a proper treatment structure nationally, with special emphasis on the part played by community and voluntary agencies. and the importance as well to support that with good research studies that really establishes the evidence base of how effective these agencies are in delivering care to people affected by drug and alcohol issues.
Very good, yeah.
Thank you.
And you know, it's interesting, there was some dialogue and discussion around at the assembly process, and you recall it, you know, do you bring this all into one big organisation, do you, you know, bring it into one big super group and appoint a SAR or whatever. But we were really struck by the impacts, as you described, at a local level, where it really makes a difference. People know their communities, they know their families, they know the supports that's needed. So the role of local and community and voluntary organisations came through very strong, and I think you'll see comes through strong in the recommendations.
And I've increased the funding as well for our community voluntary organisations, our alcohol drugs task forces by $3.5 million again this year. So this is a work in progress, and we need to, I think what you said there that's really important is to have evidence-based projects, so that the programmes that are going into specific communities have to be, I suppose, tailored to what's needed there, and that's where the evidence comes through. And a lot of the drugs and alcohol task forces are saying to me that, you know, we just need the money sometimes, and maybe they know that the programme mightn't be perfect, but it's just they're so starved of funding, they need it. I want to move away from that to help them. If it is cocaine, if it is nitazines, whatever the drug of the day is, that they can respond to it, and that's where the evidence base comes in, and it makes their role more effective as well.
Okay, if time for one more, everybody will know, anybody who's through the assembly, I do keep the time. Sorry, Gillian, yeah, I'm calling Gillian now, yeah.
How you doing? It's just in follow-up to what Eamon was saying. I'm just wondering about the on-street testing, you know, with the nitazine, the nitazine the last, sorry, I'm getting all messed up. It's not like me. Yeah, just to follow up on street testing, because, you know, they do it at concerts for middle class people, but yet they won't do it for people on the street that are most vulnerable, you know, and also for peer participation, to be involved in that, to go out and, you know, to educate our peer as to how to do this. You know, that's a question I'd like to ask. Why isn't that being done under the current situation?
Go ahead.
Eamon,
Yeah.
Professor Eamon Keenan, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's to talk about the laboratory analysis of nitazines is a bit complicated, but the machines that we use at festivals to test pills and powders is not effective at identifying nitazines. So when we got the nitazines associated with the overdoses before Christmas, we tested them on our machine that we used in the festival. It didn't detect any nitazines, and it was only when we went to a more powerful machine, which isn't portable, a GCMS machine, a gas chromatography mass spectroscopy machine, that we were able to identify nitazines. So it's not a straightforward thing to be able to identify drugs on streets. And the other thing is, I know people have been talking about testing strips. We haven't found those testing strips, and we've tested them to be effective in identifying nitazines yet. So that's why we haven't progressed those issues.
Okay. Okay, one very last comment, question. Sorry, now I have to, yeah.
Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
And then we will come back to you now.
Yep. And just to set out by saying, like, a great bit of work has been done here, and to thank all of the members of the Citizens' Assembly. You had mentioned the Oireachtas Committee. Sorry, Minister, I want to come back to you on that. Just for clarification, if it's open to all members of the Oireachtas, the membership of the committee for non-aligned TDs like myself. And then you mentioned an audit of services, and I was just wondering if you had an indication of a timeline as to when you envisioned that would be complete. And then I just have another query around just, I suppose you heard so much about how criminal records and the impact that had on individuals and their families and opportunities going forward. So will there be any consideration for those who have existing criminal records for simple possession? And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Okay, and one final comment, and then we'll ask of the Minister.
Hi, my name is Jackie McKenna, and I represent the Family Addiction Support Network and also on the National Family Support Steering Group. I'm very excited. I want to thank, first of all, the members of the Citizens' Assembly who were picked from all corners of Ireland, and it makes me so excited going forward because it's coming from a community development approach. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that we're going to face is how to marry a community development approach as to a top-down approach. Secondly, I just want to say that families really need support, because you talked about trauma, and for every one person that's addicted to drugs and alcohol, it affects up to 6 people directly within the family. And that is an awful lot of traumatised people walking around with no access to any services. So I would really ask for your support in supporting the National Family Support Steering Group for a representative at the government table, that families have a voice again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I might just start with the last one since it's fresh in my mind there, Jackie. Thanks very much for that. And I'm, I suppose, acutely aware of visiting different really fantastic organisations across the country who provide a really good model of care for families, for women, their children, and all that is outside the person with the addiction, all the supports that are needed there. So I think this is all part of the conversation, and again, the Special Oireachtas Committee can feed into that, and certainly my engagement with the likes of yourselves as well. I'll be taking all of that on board, and again, looking at the evidence, and we're looking for best models of practice that can be maybe rolled out across the country. You know, it can be as simple as that. This works well, it can apply right across the country. That's what I would be interested in, whatever we can do easily first. Deputy Violet Ann Wynne, just in relation to the audit and the mapping. So when I came into this role, I was asking questions, well, where are the services? And nobody could really say. It's all a little bit, it's not clear. There's a lot of gaps in it. So I asked for an audit to be carried out. I want an update on that. Probably the members of the NOC are in the room. Very quickly, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, even an interim kind of outline of what services are where, and then I suppose the full picture of it then in the months ahead, so that we know exactly. Because that's half the problem. If you're in Clare, if you're in Galway, and you have somebody in your family in addiction, sometimes even the services are there, but people just don't know where to go sometimes. You know, it can be that simple. It's not that they're not there, it's people don't know where they are. And then the composition of the Special Oireachtas Committee, again, I'll be bringing this memo to government. And I know from my time, I was on the Special Oireachtas Committee on the 8th Amendment, and it was every party group, but I can have a discussion with you separately in relation to the composition of that. Thank you.
Thank you. So look, we have come to the end of our time this afternoon, so sorry for anybody else who might want to go. I do want to thank the Minister for her time today, or indeed her time earlier on today. And I said at the start, and I'll say at the end of this session as well, I certainly come away today with a lot of confidence and hope that this report will be embraced by the political system. This report will work through the Oireachtas Committee at a level of pace. The Minister herself spoke about that earlier on, and I know she's committed to that too. So I just want to thank the Minister for her time and commitment from what I've seen throughout today so far. And indeed, I want to thank the political system. We were given the space during this process, which is what a Citizens' Assembly is all about. We didn't have pressure from ministers, we didn't have pressure from Oireachtas members. We were given that space, so thank you for that. But now it's over to you, as they say. And the closing from my perspective, just again, I think it's Johanna Ivers' model. She has a lot of models, Johanna Ivers, but there was one that's reflected in a report there. It's about the various type of people, the various people who may use drugs, and it's a spectrum of people who use drugs. And in some cases, people may feel they get some benefits from using drugs, whether it's medical or whatever. In some cases, people may feel they get no harm from drugs. In some cases, people may develop a chronic dependency. And in some cases, people will go into addiction. So when people say to us, oh, this is too much to do, this health-led approach, too much, it'll take on too much, it'll require too much funding, I don't believe so. We're targeting a specific element of those users who need supports, who need awareness, and through a health-led approach, I believe we can do it. So look, thanks for your time today. All the very best.